Dear students, welcome to this massive open online course on Indian Economics 1. Today we shall focus on module concerned with the planning, evolution of the plan, strategies and development goals in India. And after the completion of this module, you can understand the reasons behind the changes in the strategies, the plan strategies followed during different 5-year plans, and the process of evolution of these changes in strategies, plan strategies, and you can indicate the limitations as well as the strengths in different strategies and development goals followed during Indian 5-year plans. So let us first indicate the situation that India faced at the initial phase of Indian planning, that is from early 1950s. Actually, whenever India thought of following that planned economic strategy, planned economic development or planned economic growth, every time it faced new challenges, and based on the challenges as well as the planned targets, the strategies went on changing. So each plan had different strategies, each plan had different development goals. So if you first look into the early phase of Indian planning, namely during 1951 to say 1961, that is during the first and second 5-year plan, we'll find that India faced acute shortage of capital. So the plan started with a constraint, which we call as the capital constraint or savings constraint, because due to the paucity of savings, due to the low income, there is a poor generation of savings, and from savings we actually get investment, and from that investment we get change in the stock of capital or capital accumulation. So if you look into the basic structural constraints that the planners confronted with at the beginning, at the early phase of Indian planning, where number one, the acute deficiency of material capital. Now, what is material capital? For example, if you want to import some new technology and you do not have enough, say, power generating and distribution mechanism, if you do not have adequate power generating stations, that is needed for the uninterrupted power supply for a foreign, say, imported machine. That was the challenge. So acute shortage of or deficiency of material capital, that limited the scope of the adoption of foreign technology. The second problem was low capacity to save. As I have already pointed out, that if the country, say, is confronted with a very low level of income, then capacity to save is also very low. And if you have low savings, then your investment will be lower, and that will ultimately lead to low capital formation. So that was a challenge. And thirdly, there was a structural constraint regarding the conversion of savings into investment. What is that? If you do not have adequate number of institutional, say, financial institutions in different parts of the country, for example, if you do not have enough banking institutions, then you cannot mobilize the small savings from different parts of the country. So that was one constraint of converting, say, low savings into, say, mobilizing the savings into investment. So these are the challenges that Indian planners faced. Now the next one is the planners started with some basic assumptions. The basic assumptions were, the first one was that if you invest in agriculture, then agricultural sector exhibits, say, diminishing returns to scale. It means that if you invest in agriculture, then the rate of return will gradually fall. That was the first assumption. Second assumption was that if you invest more in industry, then there is increasing returns to scale. That means rate of return will be more than the rate of investment. Your return on investment will be higher if you invest in industry. That was the second assumption. The third assumption was that if you allow industrialization, then with the gradual expansion of industrial sector, you can absorb the surplus labor in India, because India was suffering from the huge amount of labor which actually existed in Indian agricultural sector. So that has to be shifted. And if you can expand your industrial sector, then you can absorb that surplus labor. So that was an assumption. The next assumption was that the planners did not rely upon the market forces of supply and demand, because they believed that if you allow the market forces to operate, then we cannot establish, say, social justice and equity in the distribution of income and wealth. So that was another assumption. And the last assumption was that inelastic foreign demand for our exports, particularly the primary goods. So what is the meaning? The meaning is, if you reduce the price of the primary products, exportable items, then you cannot expect, say commensurate increase in the demand for those products. So these are some of the assumptions. And the early phases of our planning actually indicated a supply side view of our planning. Supply side view, what does it mean? It means that there was a shortage of capital supply. So if you can overcome that problem, then all other problems can be, resolved. So that was a supply side approach to Indian planning. Now, the question is why the demand side was not given proper, emphasis. Our famous economist, Sukhmoy Chakraborty, in his book, Development Planning, Indian Experience, he stated that at that time, that early phase of Indian planning, India didn't experience or didn't, face that problem of, effective demand, unemployment arising out of, low effective demand. So there was no Keynesian type of unemployment which arises particularly due to low effective demand. So that was not the problem. Therefore, they felt that if the government or the public sector can invest more in capital goods sector, then every other problem can be resolved. So there were three major possibilities before the planners. First is public sector investment flowing to agriculture sector. Second option was public sector investment or the government investment can flow to infrastructure development. And the third option was that public sector investment can flow to towards industrial development. So the first option was infrastructure, public sector investment to infrastructure. Second option was public sector investment to agriculture. And the third one was public sector investment to the industrial sector. So the first 5-year plan actually emphasized on these first two options. That is, more and more government expenditure or public sector expenditure must flow to our infrastructure and agriculture. And the second 5-year plan actually emphasized on the third option, that is, public sector investment must flow more in the industrial sector. So they put more emphasis on industrial expansion, but the objective was import substitution or export pessimism. That means the plan models or strategies depended too much on import substitution. We must produce the products so as to reduce our dependence on the foreign countries, and the economy was supposed to be a closed economy. So we didn't depend too much on export and import. Now, the limitations of such inward-looking policy was that if you want to produce of your own whatever requirements you have, then you must follow a protectionist policy. That means then you have to impose more and more restrictions on your import. So if you put restrictions on your import, then one bad impact is that your domestic enterprises, they become insulated from the outside competition. So they don't have that requirement of improving their productivity. They don't feel the requirement of diversifying their products, and therefore you have a very low level of, productivity in that particular, policy. And secondly, if you follow that import substitution policy, and you find that after you impose import restrictions, your trade partners are also retaliating. They also impose trade restrictions. Then what will happen? Then ultimately the global trade flow will shrink. And that will lead to a situation where you cannot use your domestic resources to the fullest extent. That means you cannot attain the potential GDP. Now, still, the Indian planners gave more importance to capital sector, because they believed that if capital sector is given due importance, then productivity, with the improvement in the productivity of capital, then our resources can be utilized properly, and with the development of the capital goods sector, in the long run we can improve more and more our export sector. Okay, and the second 5-year plan model, as we know, it followed the Mohalanovish plan model, which gave more importance to the expansion of heavy industries. Okay, but there were some limitations in the Nehru Mohalanovish plan model, second-year plan model, because it believed that with the expansion of heavy industries, other small-scale industries will also develop through linkage effect. But that didn't happen. And since it followed, capital-intensive technology, it could not create enough income and employment potentiality. So, second 5-year plan strategy failed to establish, social security or social justice in our economy. Therefore, the objective was to create more equity in the system. And the third 5-year plan model also took this particular point, that they wanted to establish income and wealth, equality in the system. They wanted to reduce inequality in the distribution of income and wealth. But the third 5-year plan model could not follow a specific strategy so as to operationalize this particular strategy. Now, there was a need for distribution, because the first phase of Indian planning, our famous economist, Sukhumai Chakraborty, he indicated that those plan models indicated a particular equation in macroeconomics, which indicated that accumulation plus consumption is equal to production. Production means supply, consumption is consumption demand, and accumulation means accumulation of capital, that is investment. Now, they neglected consumption. And Sukhumai Chakraborty was of the view that some of the consumption items were very much close to accumulation. That means if you can increase the consumption of health, education, etc., then you can improve the productivity of workers, and you can create human capital in the system, and that will ultimately lead to higher productivity of capital. And even keeping your total consumption constant, if you distribute that consumption items properly among different layers of the society, then also you can improve the productivity of labor. So that was the point in our plan strategy. So the fourth plan, 5-year plan, it gave more importance to the increasing the productivity of agriculture and the productivity of labor in agriculture through a technical revolution that we have already discussed before. That means adopting improved instruments in agriculture, adopting high yielding varieties of seeds, etc. And we had green revolution. But in fourth 5-year plan also, it was observed that due to such adoption of new technology in agriculture, only some few areas, few states, they benefited from this particular new technique, and there was ultimately inequality in the distribution of income between the rich farmer and the poor farmers. Why? Because the rich farmer could adopt this new technology more efficiently, because they could only undertake the risk and the cost of undertaking this new technology. So the fifth 5-year plan model, strategy, it changed the strategy. The strategy was from growth to this distribution. That means now the focus is not only on growth of output, but the focus is growth with proper redistribution. And that redistribution means proper increase in the consumption items. That means that plan gave more emphasis on agricultural development. If agricultural product and productivity can be increased, then the consumption goods, the supply can be increased, and per capita consumption can be increased. So agriculture came into the forefront. Along with that, fifth 5-year plan also gave importance to that self-reliant economic growth, or import substitution, inward-looking growth. Now, there was some weakness in that fifth 5-year plan model, because that model could not create a proper link between the demand and production. that in the demand there was marginal propensity to consume, and that was linked with the production, but there was no reverse link between the production to demand. That means if you can increase the production, you cannot ensure proper the consumption. And the sixth plan model, we find that lacuna was fulfilled by some taking into account some specific programs for creation of rural employment or reducing the rural poverty. Seventh five-year plan, again, it gave more importance to agricultural-led economic growth because it believed that if you give more emphasis on agriculture, then your import demand can be reduced, you can create more employment in agriculture, and you can reduce the inequality in the distribution of income and wealth. Okay? And during the eighth five-year plan, you please see that during eighth five-year plan, what we observed, there was a dramatic shift in the strategy because India faced the troubles at the late 1980s, and it had to undertake the new strategy where it gave more importance to export-led growth, more outward orientation with reduced government intervention. Now, as you have seen that during the eighth five-year plan, the strategy followed by the planners were the export-led growth. That means outward orientation towards the growth strategy. And during the ninth five-year plan also, that means during 1997 to 2002, the same strategy was followed. That means the export-led growth. But that subsequently, they have identified some of the loopholes of this export-led growth. Because if you follow export-led growth, then you actually open your economy. Because now the economy is quite open. The restrictions is less. Your import restrictions are less. So you are more susceptible to global fluctuations. You are more susceptible to international, fluctuations in the business environment. And by itself, the export-led growth, although it can increase your growth, but it cannot ensure the inequality, reduction in inequality in the distribution of income and wealth in the country. Therefore, the 10th five-year plan, which also gave importance to export-led growth, also actually admitted the need for government intervention in some particular strategic sectors where the private sectors do not want to step in. Now, what are those sectors? First was the infrastructure development, because in our country, be it agricultural growth or industrial growth, they are really constrained. Till now, they are constrained by infrastructural facilities. So the private sectors, they do not want to block their resources for a long time in this infrastructural investment because they need huge amount of investment and the gestation lag is huge. What is gestation lag? Gestation lag is the time gap between your investment and the return therefrom. Therefore, the government has to take the responsibility of investing more in this infrastructural facilities. And number two is social sector. That means in health sector, in primary education. In those sectors also, you cannot make those sectors open to the private investors because in those sectors, we need more social welfare rather than private profit. Therefore, the 10th five-year plan, we observe that there was a slight shift in the export-led growth towards more inclusiveness. And in 11th five-year plan, it was more vivid. The plan gave more importance to inclusive growth. And here you find the similarity between the 5th five-year plan model where you shifted from growth to redistribution during 5th five-year plan, and here also in 11th five-year plan, you are giving more importance to inclusive growth. So almost similar, but the situations are different. Here, the country is following a free market economy, but during 5th five-year plan, the policy environment was quite different. Now, if you want to have such inclusiveness, then what is inclusive growth? Inclusive growth means an economic growth which is distributed fairly across different layers of the society and creates opportunities for all sections of the people. And this includes adequate level of consumption of food items and access to basic services like education, health, safe drinking water, etc. Now, coming to some of the challenges which were faced during that time period. The first challenge was providing essential public services for the poor, okay, and then regaining agricultural dynamism. This is very important because agricultural productivity was falling. So if you reverse that productivity, if you want to increase that productivity, you need a second green revolution. Second green revolution can happen only with the introduction of technology which is quite different from the earlier technology. Now you have to follow organic farming technology, okay, now which the government is giving more importance. And you have to increase the competitive strength of your manufacturing sector. Otherwise, you cannot compete in the global market. And the second challenge, and the last challenge, was protecting the environment. There is a trade-off between environment and the production. If you increase your industrial output, if you emit more carbon, then your environment will be polluted more. So if you want to safeguard your environment, as well as if you want to grow, then you must protect your environment, and you must use such a technology which we call as green technology. So those are the challenges. Now, during the 12th five-year plan, some new challenges were there because the whole global economy was suffering from a slowdown starting from 2007-8, from where there was a financial crisis erupted in USA and other European countries that you know, and our domestic economy was also facing some challenges. So the 12th five-year plan not only emphasized in its planned strategy, not only emphasized on growth, but also it wanted faster growth, sustainable growth, and more inclusive growth. See, the emphasis points: growth with sustainability, growth with inclusiveness. So the strategies are changing from time to time, and if you observe, the action plans taken by the Niti Aayog during 2017-20 will also find this type of strategies followed by the Niti Aayog. That means a sustainable growth, and all-inclusive growth. That means here more and more people will get the fruits of that growth. So from this strategy, if you want to materialize this strategy, then faster growth can be achieved through greater emphasis on private sector investment, no doubt. If you want inclusive growth, then that can be achieved through generation of income and employment opportunities among the common people. And if you want sustainable growth, then you must emphasize on the adoption of new technology, green technology. So in conclusion, we can say that from this discussion, this module gives us an idea regarding the evolution of the planned strategies and planned goals over the last 8 decades of Indian planning, and how there has been a shift from plan to plan, how the strategies have shifted, why the planned strategy shifted, because in the earlier phase of planning there was an inward-looking policy, but in the later part we observed an export-oriented growth strategy, and then it boils down to more inclusive growth strategy, more sustainable growth strategy. So every strategy, every planned strategy wants to emphasize on the present problem and how best you can tackle those problems through your planning, through your proper strategy, through building up proper plan targets and goals. Okay, thank you very much for joining this particular module.